I don't need cripples here. This isn't a charity case. The words, sharp as a gutting knife, cut through the Kodiak harbor air. Captain Rostova stood on the deck of the Seawolf, her eyes the color of a winter sky, fixed on my prosthetic leg. The smell of diesel and brine felt heavy in my lungs as the younger crewmen looked down at their boots, avoiding my gaze. She was the captain, a woman carved from the unforgiving Alaskan landscape, and I was just the one-legged veteran she'd been forced to hire. Her contempt was a physical thing, a cold weight on the deck. She saw me as a liability, a broken piece of equipment before we even left the dock. She had no idea the real storm wasn't in her prejudice, but waiting for us out on the Bering Sea. But nobody imagined what I would do that day. If this phrase made you remember someone, just comment with, "I understand." My name is Ben. I'm 48 years old, and for most of my life, the sea has been the only thing that made sense. It doesn't judge. It doesn't care what you look like or where you came from. It only cares if you respect its power. It's a brutal, honest truth that I've always understood. After the Army, after losing a part of myself in the sand and dust of a place I can barely remember, the cold, clean honesty of the Alaskan waters felt like a homecoming. But on the Seawolf, that honesty was gone, replaced by the constant, grinding weight of Captain Rostova's contempt. She saw my prosthetic not as a tool I had mastered, but as a flaw, a crack in the hull of her perfectly efficient operation. Every day was a test, and not from the sea. It was from her. The crew, good men at heart, learned to follow her lead. They kept their distance, their conversations dying down whenever I got close. I was a foreign object, a piece of shrapnel in the heart of their well-oiled machine, and she never let them forget it. I remember one morning, just a few days after we'd left the dock. The sea was choppy, but manageable. We were baiting pots, a rhythmic, back-breaking job. The deck was slick with ice and fish guts. I was moving a little slower than the others, not because I couldn't keep up, but because I had to be more deliberate. Every step was a calculation of balance, weight, and grip. Rostova was watching from the wheelhouse, a mug of coffee steaming in her hand. She called out over the winch's groan, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Ben, the bait chopper's jammed. Get in there and clear it." Now, clearing the chopper is the greenhorn's job. It's a filthy, disgusting task, kneeling in fish slime and bone fragments, reaching into a mess of blades. Leo, the youngest on the crew, started to move toward it, but Rostova stopped him with a look. I said, "Ben." Her eyes were locked on me. The other two crewmen, Mike and Dave, stopped working for a second. They knew what this was. It was a power play, designed to humiliate, to get on my hands and knees on a pitching deck, to struggle in front of them all. I just nodded, my jaw tight. I knelt down, the cold of the steel deck seeping through my overalls. I could feel their eyes on me, could feel Rostova's smug satisfaction. The phantom ache in my missing leg flared up, a hot, angry nerve firing in response to the cold and the humiliation. I cleared the jam, my hands covered in gore, and didn't say a word. I just got up, wiped my hands, and went back to work. The silence from the crew was worse than any laughter. Another time, we were securing the pots in a rising swell. The boat was lurching hard. I was lashing down a stack when a particularly nasty wave hit us broadside. I stumbled, catching myself on the rail. It was a minor slip, something that happened to everyone out here. But Rostova saw it. She leaned out of her window and shouted, for everyone to hear, "Watch your step, half-man. Don't want you taking a swim. I'm not rated for salvage." The crew chuckled nervously. They weren't bad men, but they were scared of her, and her ridicule gave them a safe target. I felt my face burn, a hot flush of shame and rage. I wanted to yell back, to tell her about the men I'd carried on my back, about the storms I'd weathered that had nothing to do with water. But I just tightened the knot on the rope, my knuckles white. Out here, you learn to swallow your pride like salt water. It burns on the way down, but you survive. That was the currency of my life on her boat, survival. I was isolated, a ghost on my own crew, defined not by my work or my experience, but by the piece of me that was missing. I'd eat my meals alone, staring out at the endless gray water, feeling more kinship with the cold, indifferent sea than with the men I shared a deck with. Then came a day that started like any other. The sky was a flat, gray sheet, the sea a dull, rolling steel. We were 3 days out, in a stretch of the Bering Sea known for its unpredictable currents. The work was monotonous: drop, haul, sort, repeat. But through the drone of the engine and the crash of the waves, I started to hear something else. It was a sound that didn't belong. A faint, high-pitched whine, almost imperceptible, coming from the engine room. It was inconsistent, a metallic stress sound that would rise for a few seconds and then fade into the engine's deeper rumble. I'd spent years around heavy machinery, first in the army and then on boats. You learn the language of machines, their groans of protest before they fail. I stopped what I was doing and just listened, trying to pinpoint it. "You hear that?" I asked Mike, who was working beside me. He paused, tilting his head. "Hear what?" "Just the engine." I tried to explain it. "It's a whine, a high-frequency sound. Something's not right." He just shrugged. "Sounds fine to me, Ben. Probably just the cold." I knew it wasn't just the cold. This was different. This was the sound of metal being pushed past its limit. During a lull, I went to the wheelhouse. Rostova was charting our course, her face illuminated by the green glow of the radar. "Captain," I said, keeping my voice even, "I think there's something wrong with the engine, a high-pitched whine. We should check the hydraulics." She didn't even look up from her charts. "The engine is fine, Ben. It was serviced in Kodiak. Don't go looking for problems that aren't there. Just do your job." Her dismissal was absolute. To her, it was just the cripple being paranoid, hearing ghosts in the machine. I stood there for a moment, the whine faintly audible even over her radio's static. She was wrong. I knew she was wrong, but no one was listening. I walked out onto the deck, the cold wind hitting my face. They all thought I was broken, a liability, but I could hear something they couldn't. I could feel a different kind of storm coming, one that had nothing to do with the weather, and I realized, standing there alone, that if something was going to be done, I was the only one who would do it. If you've ever felt this way, just leave a in the comments. We understand. I ignored her dismissal, but the sound didn't ignore me. It stayed with me, a ghost in the machine, a thin, sharp thread of sound woven through the engine's constant roar. For the rest of the day, I worked with one ear tuned to the deck and the other tuned to the heart of the boat. The whine was still there, a patient, metallic predator waiting its turn. The sea was building, the gray waves turning into black mountains with white, angry peaks. The wind howled, tearing at our clothes and freezing the salt spray to our faces. We were hauling a line of pots, the winch groaning under the strain, when it happened. The high-pitched whine I'd been hearing for hours suddenly screamed, a piercing shriek of tortured metal that cut through the gale. It was followed by a sound like a cannon shot from deep within the boat's guts. A loud, final bang. The entire vessel shuddered, a violent convulsion that threw us all off balance. The massive hydraulic winch, which had been hauling a 1,000-pound crab pot from the depths, went completely dead. The pot, halfway out of the water, plunged back into the sea, the thick steel cable whipping through the air with enough force to cut a man in half. Mike and Dave scrambled back, their faces white with shock. The boat, no longer fighting the drag of the pot, lurched sideways into a deep trough between waves. Everything that wasn't bolted down slid across the deck. From the wheelhouse, I could hear Rostova shouting into the radio, her voice tight with a panic she was trying to suppress. The lights flickered and then died, plunging us into the gray twilight of the storm, save for the weak, battery-powered emergency lamps that cast long, dancing shadows. The main engine was still running, but it sounded rough, labored. The heart of the boat was wounded. "What the hell was that?" Dave yelled over the wind. "Did we hit something?" Mike was just staring at the dead winch, his eyes wide. The hydraulics are gone, all of them. That meant no hauling pods. More importantly, it likely meant our steering assist was gone too. In a sea like this, that was a death sentence. We were adrift, a toy at the mercy of the storm. I saw Rostova emerge from the wheelhouse, her face pale in the emergency light. She was barking orders, but there was no conviction in them. Check the breakers, get a damage report. But the crew was frozen. They were fishermen, not mechanics. They knew ropes and tides, not the intricate guts of a complex machine in catastrophic failure. They looked at her, then at each other, their fear a tangible thing on the deck. I knew what I had to do. The sound, the shudder, the specific way the power died, it all pointed to one thing, a catastrophic hydraulic line failure. I pushed past the others and headed for the engine room hatch. Rostova saw me. "Ben, what do you think you're doing?" Her voice was sharp, but the usual contempt was gone, replaced by desperation. "I'm going to take a look," I said, not breaking my stride. "Someone has to." I didn't wait for her permission. I twisted the handle on the heavy steel hatch and descended the ladder into hell. The air hit me first, a choking, acrid cloud of hot diesel and vaporized hydraulic fluid. It burned my lungs and made my eyes water. The noise was deafening, a chaotic symphony of the laboring engine and the high-pressure hiss of escaping fluid. The floor plates were slick with the stuff, a treacherous mirror in the dim light. The boat pitched violently, and I had to brace myself against the bulkhead, my hands slipping on the oily steel. My prosthetic foot was my only point of solid purchase. I planted it hard, the carbon fiber gripping where my boot would have slid. I saw the problem immediately. A main pressure line, thick as my wrist, had burst at a joint. A high-pressure geyser of hot, atomized fluid was spraying across the entire compartment, coating everything, creating an invisible, explosive mist. We were one spark away from being blown out of the water. Panic tried to claw its way up my throat, cold and sharp. My hands were shaking. I wasn't a mechanic, not really, but in the Army, you learn to improvise or you die. I saw the main shutoff valve for the system, but it was on the other side of the spraying fluid. To get to it, I'd have to go right through the worst of it. I could feel them watching from the hatch above, the crew and Rostova. I could feel the weight of their doubt, their expectation of failure. The cripple, the half-man, was going to try to fix the unbreakable. I took a deep breath, the foul air searing my throat. I grabbed a heavy wrench from the wall-mounted toolkit, my knuckles white, and I moved. I didn't run. I couldn't. Each step was a deliberate act of will. I planted my prosthetic, tested the grip, then moved my good leg. The hot fluid blasted against my side, soaking through my overalls, scalding my skin. It felt like 1,000 burning needles. The roar was all-encompassing. I couldn't see clearly, couldn't think. There was only the valve, a red wheel in the gloom. I reached it, my hands fumbling on the oily surface. It was stiff, frozen with corrosion and pressure. I put the wrench on it, put my entire body weight into it, my muscles screaming in protest. For a second, nothing happened. The boat lurched again, throwing me against the hot engine block. A fresh wave of pain shot up my arm. I reset my feet, my prosthetic anchoring me to the deck, and I pulled again, roaring with effort, the sound lost in the chaos. It moved, just a fraction of an inch, with a groan of protesting metal. I pulled again, and again. Slowly, painfully, the valve began to turn. The high-pressure hiss started to die down, replaced by a dripping, sputtering sound. I kept turning until it was tight, until the spray was gone, until the only sound was the ragged thunder of the main engine and my own gasping breath. I leaned against the bulkhead, my body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion, my skin burning. I had stopped the bleeding, but we were still dead in the water. That's when everything changed. And no one ever looked at me the same way again. Would you have done the same? Seriously, just answer with a yes or no, so I know you're here. I climbed back up the ladder, my legs shaking from adrenaline, my skin screaming where the hot fluid had soaked through. When my head cleared the hatch, the world on deck was eerily quiet. The howl of the wind was still there, the crash of waves against the hull was still a constant, violent drumbeat, but the chaotic, high-pitched scream from the engine room was gone. 3 faces were staring down at me, illuminated in the flickering, ghostly light of the emergency lamps. Mike, Dave, and Captain Rostova. Their expressions were identical, a mixture of raw fear and disbelief. They looked like they were seeing a ghost. Maybe they were. The ghost of the man they thought I was. I pulled myself the rest of the way onto the deck, my soaked overalls dripping a dark, greasy slick onto the steel. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, catching my breath, the acrid taste of atomized fluid still coating my tongue. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. It was Dave who broke it, his voice barely a whisper. Did you fix it?" I shook my head, the motion feeling slow and heavy. "No. I just stopped the bleeding. The main hydraulic pump is shot. It blew the primary line clean off. We have no winch, no crane, and no steering assist." The reality of those last 3 words landed on them like a physical blow. No steering assist. In a storm this violent, trying to turn the rudder manually would be like trying to arm wrestle a giant. The boat would be unresponsive and we'd be forced broadside to the waves, a position that would swamp and capsize us in minutes. I saw the last bit of color drain from Mike's face. He looked at Rostova, his eyes pleading for an answer, for some reassurance that the captain had a plan. But Rostova was just staring at me. Her hard, unforgiving face was unreadable for the first time since I'd met her. The smug superiority was gone. The contempt had vanished. In its place was a blank, stunned confusion. She, the master of this vessel, the woman carved from the Alaskan Sea itself, had no idea what to do, and she knew that I knew it. "We can bypass it," I said, my voice coming out raspy and low. "There's an auxiliary pump for the backup systems. It's not designed to handle the main rudder, but if we can reroute a secondary line directly to the steering gear, we might get enough pressure to have some control. It won't be pretty, but it might keep us from rolling over." I wasn't asking for permission. I was stating the only viable plan. I looked from Mike to Dave. "I need the largest pipe wrench you can find, and every spare hydraulic fitting in the locker. Go. Now." For a split second they glanced at Rostova, the instinct to wait for her command still ingrained. But she remained silent, her gaze locked on me. Then without a word they turned and scrambled toward the storage lockers. They moved with a purpose I hadn't seen in them before. I turned my attention to Rostova. We stood there for a moment, the storm raging around us, the only 2 people on deck. "Captain," I said, my voice level, stripped of any emotion, "you need to get on the radio. Tell the Coast Guard our situation. We're crippled, but we're not sinking. Not yet. And you need to keep us pointed into the waves as best you can with the main engine. It's going to be a fight." She just nodded, a short, jerky motion. The woman who had called me a half-man, a charity case, was now taking orders from me. There was no argument, no challenge. There was only the cold, hard reality of survival, and in that moment, I was the only one with a map. She turned and went back into the wheelhouse, her shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. When Mike and Dave returned with the tools, their movements were quick, efficient. The way they looked at me had changed completely. The pity, the awkward avoidance, it was all gone. They were looking at me like I was a different person, but I wasn't. I was the same man who had stepped on this boat days ago. They were just seeing me for the first time. "Okay," I said, taking the heavy wrench. "This is going to be hell. Dave, I need you to stay on this hatch. If I call for a tool, you get it to me. Mike, you're coming with me. Do exactly what I say when I say it." Mike, a man 10 years my junior and twice my size, just nodded, his face grim. "Right behind you, Ben." We descended back into the engine room. It was still a mess, slick with oil, but the air was clearer. The work was brutal. We were in a cramped pitching space, surrounded by hot metal. I directed Mike, showing him which lines to disconnect, which valves to seal. I used my prosthetic as an anchor, wedging it into corners to give me leverage that a normal leg couldn't. I braced myself against bulkheads, my carbon fiber limb giving me a point of stability in the chaos. At one point, I needed to reach a fitting deep inside the machinery. I couldn't get the right angle. Without a word, Mike braced my back with his hands, holding me steady, while I snaked my arm into the guts of the machine, my fingers finding the fitting by feel alone. We worked in a strange, silent unison, a team forged in the heart of a crisis. After what felt like an eternity, we were done. We had cannibalized a secondary line and connected the small auxiliary pump directly to the steering gear. It was a messy, ugly patch, held together with mismatched fittings and a prayer. "That's it," I gasped, wiping sweat and grease from my face with the back of my hand. "That's all we can do." We climbed back out onto the deck, exhausted, filthy, and sore. Rostova was standing by the hatch, waiting. She had watched the entire repair from above. She had seen me guide her crew. She had seen me use the very part of me she despised as a tool to save us. I looked her in the eye. "Try the helm," I said. "Go easy. If it holds, it won't hold for long." She disappeared into the wheelhouse. A moment later, we felt it, a subtle shift in the boat's rhythm. Instead of being slammed by the wave's broadside, the bow began to slowly, sluggishly, turn back into the swell. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief went through us. We weren't saved, not by a long shot, but we were fighting back. We had a chance. Mike clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable that morning. "I don't know what to say, Ben," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our asses." Dave just stood there, shaking his head in quiet awe. The whispers, the jokes, the isolation, it all felt like it had happened a lifetime ago to someone else, on a different boat. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't said "I told you so." I didn't need to. The proof was in the groaning turn of the ship, in the newfound hope on the faces of the crew, and in the profound, deafening silence from the wheelhouse. If you've ever proven something to someone in silence, just comment, "They understood too late." The journey back to Kodiak was a long, grinding purgatory. The storm didn't just disappear, it slowly exhausted itself, its fury replaced by a sullen, heavy swell that tossed us around for another 2 days. The makeshift steering held, but just barely. Every turn of the wheel was a gamble, accompanied by the groaning protest of the overworked auxiliary pump. For 48 hours, no one really slept. We lived on stale coffee and adrenaline. Our world shrunk to the radius of the emergency lights and the constant, violent motion of the sea. But something fundamental had shifted in that small, violent world. The isolation I'd felt, that invisible wall between me and the rest of the crew, had been torn down in the engine room. Mike and Dave were different men. They no longer skirted around me. They brought me coffee without being asked. They'd sit near me during the rare moments of calm, not saying much, but their presence was a quiet apology. During one long watch, Mike, his face etched with exhaustion, just looked at me and said, "My brother was in the service. He never talked about it. I guess I never got it. Until now." He didn't say anything else, and he didn't have to. The respect in his eyes was more than I'd ever expected. I was no longer the broken veteran. I was just Ben, the man who knew what to do when the world was coming apart at the seams. But the real change, the one that echoed in the silence, was Captain Rostova. She never said thank you. She never apologized for her words, for the weeks of quiet humiliation. As the premise stated, people like her don't. Their pride is a fortress built on a foundation of being right, and admitting they were wrong is a crack they can't afford. But her actions spoke a language louder than any apology could. She ran her ship, but she included me. Before making a course correction, she'd call me to the wheelhouse. "Ben, what do you think? Can the patch handle this angle?" She wasn't asking for permission, she was consulting an expert. Me. The man she had called a liability was now her chief advisor on the very thing keeping us alive. One morning, with the gray light of dawn just breaking through the clouds, she simply handed me a steaming mug of coffee. She didn't say a word, just held it out. I took it, and our eyes met for a second. In that brief moment, I saw it all. The grudging respect, the shame she would never voice, the profound, undeniable fact that I had proven her wrong in the most absolute way possible. She had judged the cover, and I had rewritten the book. She turned and looked out at the sea, her sea, and I knew she was seeing it differently now. It wasn't just a place that tested whole bodies. It was a place that revealed true strength, no matter what form it came in. When the snow-dusted peaks of Kodiak Island finally appeared on the horizon, it felt like a dream. Pulling into the harbor was a slow, careful affair. Other crews on the dock stopped what they were doing to watch us limp in. They could see the damage, the way the Seawolf listed slightly, the exhaustion on our faces. We looked like a ghost ship returning from a war. As soon as we were tied up, the owner was there, his face a mask of worry. Rostova met him on the dock, and I could hear their conversation, her voice low and serious. I saw her point back at the boat, back towards me, as I was coiling a line. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew. The crew was quiet as we secured the last of the gear. Before we left, Dave, the quietest of the three, walked over to me. He just stuck out his hand. "I owe you my life, Ben. If you ever need a deckhand, you just say the word." We shook hands, and for the first time since I'd stepped on this boat, I felt like part of a crew, part of something. The sea has a way of stripping away everything that isn't real. It doesn't care about your ego, your title, or how you look. It cares about what you do when the waves are breaking over the rails and the lights go out. In that moment, it's not the person who shouts the loudest who matters. It's the one who moves when everyone else is frozen. It's the one who sees a solution where others only see the end. That storm washed away all the prejudice and the posturing and left only the truth of what we were. Rostova was a captain, but she was fallible. The crew were good men, but they were followers. And I was the man they had dismissed, the one they saw as incomplete. But it turned out the piece of me that was gone was replaced with something stronger, something they all needed to survive. I still fish. I even captain my own boat now. Sometimes I see Rostova on the docks. We don't talk much. We just nod. It's a nod of understanding. A shared memory of a night when the Bering Sea decided to teach a lesson. But I often wonder, standing on my own deck, looking out at that same gray water, do they remember me for what I did out there? Or do they just respect me now because, for one terrifying night, they desperately needed the one man they had already written off? If you've ever been in that position, where your actions had to speak for you because no one would listen to your words, leave a comment with the one word that defines you when they all doubted you.